All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the March 13th Committee of the Whole meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and request any declarations of conflict. Hearing none. Could I get a motion to adopt the agenda as written? Second. All in favor? No one opposed. Appointments and delegations. I don't think we have any of those, so we can move on to business items. Any new business for the agenda? Nothing. Okay, on to item 5.1, Law and Service Awards. I'm going to hand it over to Darnelda, and she can speak to this.
Okay, can council stand?
Yes, and council will stand, please.
Perfect. So I wanted to first of all recognize that we have a number of staff who've been with the district either here or at the RCMP for a number of years. We did not, for whatever reason, acknowledge them in 2017, so we're doing the 2017 and 2018 Long Service Awards. So we're going to start with Beverly Albach. So Beverly's not in attendance, she's actually at training right now. Did you guys want to come up front here?
Yes. I don't want to knock you.
Perfect.
Push you out of the way.
So Beverly's not in attendance. As I said, she's away for some training. But she commenced employment in January 2017 with the district at the RCMP as the administrative assistant to the detachment commander. So she's been with us for 10 years. She moved over to the municipal hall as an administrative assistant for the finance department in 2009. She was promoted to the position of Applications and Systems Analyst in 2013 and promoted to the position of Information Technology Manager in 2017. So we want to acknowledge Beverly for 10 years. Sanat, yeah. So next, for 10 years of service, Sanat Bandera commenced employment in April 2007. He began his career with the district as a development and project engineer. He has his professional engineering designation with the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of BC. He was temporarily the acting director of development services in 2013 and promoted to the position of manager of engineering services in 2014. So Sanat, please come forward. Are you taking pictures now? Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to take pictures of this, and then you can take this and you can take this and take it. Next is Kim Whaley. So for 10 years, we want to acknowledge Kim Whaley. Kim has a degree in communications from Simon Fraser University. She completed the Groundskeeper 1 program at Kwantlen Polytechnic University and worked as a groundskeeper at the Sechelt Golf and Country Club for 9 years. Then she commenced employment with the district in August 2007. She began her career with the district as a parks laborer. She was promoted to the position of parks maintenance in 2016, where she is responsible for the maintenance of 32 park and streetscape locations each week during the mowing season. So she's the one on our mower out there. Currently the Union Bargaining Committee Chairperson and the Union Chair of the Joint Job Evaluation Committee and Joint Occupational Health and Safety Committee. Congratulations, Kim.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Sorry. And Wendy comes. Cough for her again. So in 2017, Wendy Cummings completed 20 years. So she commenced employment in May 1997. She began her career with the district at the RCMP as an RCMP secretary. She was promoted to the position of Operational Support Coordinator in 2006. She has held special constable status in the province of BC since 1997. She's worked countless hours in the service of workplace health and safety, first aid, and mental health wellness, and is a recognized peer-to-peer support person. She's the appointed firearms verifier under the Canadian Firearms Program. Every year, she dedicates volunteer hours for Cops for Cancer fundraising events and initiatives. And perhaps most importantly, she is the face behind Safety Bear, serving many hours in costume as the RCMP mascot, bringing smiles to children all across Sechelt. Come on up, Wendy. Awesome. Bonnie, yours. And for 20 years, we want to recognize Connie Jordison. Connie commenced employment in November 1997 with the district. She began as a confidential administrative assistant, and she was promoted to the position of Human Resources Officer in 2005. Then she was promoted to the position of Coordinator, Community and Council Relations, as well in 2005. In 2012, she was promoted to the position of Communications Manager. And she recently retired, just last year. We miss her here in the district. Come on, Connie.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Now, are you going to take your other role? So now we're going to get to the 2018 Long Service Awards. So 10 years. Greg Horning, first one up. Greg commenced employment in February 2008. He began his career with the district at the RCMP as an administrative assistant, CPIC. He was promoted to the position of bylaw enforcement officer, in 2013, and promoted to the position of bylaw enforcement officer 2 in 2016. He's currently a union bargaining committee member and union member of the Joint Job Evaluation Committee. Congratulations, Greg. I'm going to mention a couple others. Okay. So we have a couple of others to mention who aren't in attendance. So John Hart was a building inspector with us, recently took a position down in Gibsons. He was with the District of Sechelt for 10 years. And 25 years, Doug Kopp. Those of you who know Doug Kopp, right? He was at the old treatment plant, and he's retired, but he's actually working part-time for us at the Water Resource Center. He worked for us for 25 years. And Paul Appelt, as well, is not in attendance, 25 years. He commenced employment in June 1993 as an assistant engineering technician, and he was promoted to the position of engineering technician 1 in 2009. So we had 3 others. So acknowledge them. Thank you very much.
righty, moving on. That's great to see as many people as for the Law Service Awards. It's good to see, for sure. On to item 5.2, Council Policy on Cannabis Retail Stores, report from Tracy Coyle.
Okay.
Motion to receive the report. All in favor? There we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members of committee. The report in front of you is for a proposed policy on how we will handle applications for non-medical cannabis retail stores. We are starting to receive applications from the province on this. Sounds really echoey. And we don't have zoning or policy in place for this at this time. A report was brought in front of you a couple of months ago just to put the definitions into the zoning bylaw for non-medical cannabis, but we didn't apply it to zones. So what I had prepared is just before we went into addressing what kind of zoning or what kind of regulations, thought it would be helpful of putting together more of a policy statement and get some feedback from you on that, and then depending on there, would either bring forward a revised policy with proposed zoning amendments. But I wanted to get a sense from you before we do anything more or go out to further consultation as to what kind of elements you think are appropriate. I did look at a number of municipalities that have put either policies or regulations in place. There isn't a lot of consistency there. Some are quite generous with how it proceeds, and some subject all of them to site-specific rezoning applications. There's no as of right, and a couple have decided not to actually allow them in their community at all. So the intent here would, for the policy is it would provide guidance on how we'd actually deal with the applications coming in, provide guidance to not only what we do with zoning, but our business license requirements. We can set certain conditions through that process. And then some criteria for you to consider, and I'll go through all of those as to what that might mean. But under the legislation, local municipalities can set regulations on this. Unlike any other use as well, you do have the option of not allowing it at all, and that's most unusual. Usually you have to provide somewhere for a use, but under the federal and provincial legislation, it does give a municipality the option to just not proceed with it. Also would mention when we're ever dealing with an application under the provincial legislation, a municipal council must give a positive recommendation or it doesn't move forward. Unlike liquor, where they can, we will give a recommendation and they will take that into consideration and they can choose to abide by it or not abide by it. With a cannabis, non-medical cannabis application, they have to have a positive from you or the application stops at that point. Or if it's a refusal on you, it stops. So the criteria that you may consider is land use, separation distances, the number of establishments, if you want to set that, and the location. Some things around appearance, form and character, signage, lighting, those kind of things come into it. And then, of course, conformity with the regulations. So under the legislation, there are two things in BC driving this. Under the Cannabis Control and Licensing Act, they're the ones that establish the whole retail licensing regime and all the conditions with that. And under the Cannabis Distribution Act, they essentially set up a monopoly as being the wholesale distributor of non-medical cannabis. So here are the things that local government can weigh in on, including odor, which is one of the things that came through in our public consultation that people were probably most concerned about was odor. So for some questions to consider under the land use provisions is what kind of designations and zones are appropriate? Should it be like in the medical marijuana, we made them permitted uses in certain zones under certain conditions? Should it be a stricter use of conditional use? You don't have as of right, but if you meet certain requirements, you could be considered in a specific zone. Or should it be subjected to a site-specific rezoning process? So what is proposed in the policy is that we'd limit them to two OCP designation areas: the downtown center and the regional commercial designation on Schedule C3. So that's limiting the regional commercial one to the Wilson Creek area. And then allow it in the zoning within those designations where we allow retail. Option is also to limit it, and this would work in both, to limit it to C2 and to establish conditions associated with it. So this is the OCP designation in the bright red. That is the downtown center and the C2 areas. They overlap quite a bit in that area. So that's what it would be limited to. There would be no designation in West Sechelt. There would be nothing north of East Porpoise Bay Road. There's no provision above that in that area. So it's very much confined to kind of where the our temporary use permits are. It's within that area. And then in the designation would restrict to the regional commercial under the C3 schedule, and so that's limiting that area to the Field Road regional commercial area. And again, nothing in Davis Bay, nothing anywhere in the north area. So some policies and some bylaws will set separation distances. I'm not a huge fan of them, but lots of people like them. The intention is in a lot of the legislation around either medical or non-medical cannabis has to do with protecting schools and youth from either the promotional ads or signage. It's a little challenging in the era of smartphones and what you can download as to whether youth need to be protected physically from this, so something for you to consider. So the proposal there was 150 meters from elementary and secondary schools. Some bylaws will take the sensitive use to include everything related to youth, so that would be the aquatic center, playgrounds, anything where it's a programmed playground. Some go so far as daycare centers. The challenge I found when we were playing around with the buffering options is that anything much more than this essentially sterilizes most of the areas. There's very little area if we apply that in the downtown. It's just not that big. Some I've seen as well will have separation distances between the shops. And again, we played around with some different buffering zones on that and found that because the downtown core is so small, it would really limit it to maybe 2, because there's some that are quite close together, although it doesn't appear as though there's a clustering, but that's usually what those kind of regulations are put in place for. So this is what the areas look like when we did 150 around the high school, the elementary school, the aquatic center, and Hackett. We didn't include other playgrounds. We played around with the one that was down by Friendship Park, and it takes out most of the downtown. So that's something to consider. If we left it at that, it leaves most of the C2 area in the downtown still available. And then in the Wilson Creek area, looked at 2 elements, the Davis Bay School and park area. The park with the playground essentially takes out most of, not all of it, but a fair bit of that that area. It is physically separated, so I don't know if in the Wilson Creek area we need to worry too much. The Davis Bay School is so physically separated from the Wilson Creek area. The other consideration, instead of separation distances, if there's a concern around proliferation as to whether the total number should be limited. When we went into public consultation on this, it was quite split. There were some who felt that it should be very restricted of anywhere from 0 to 3, and some that felt there should be no restriction from government, just let the market decide what it can bear. So in the policy, it was looking at a total of 6. That would be high from a market penetration point of view. Given our population, what it probably could bear would be less than that, but it's a new market, so I'm not really in a position to judge on that one. Suggesting that 6 in total, we'd have no more than total of 5 in the downtown, 2 in Wilson Creek. I know that doesn't add up to 6, one of them would go. And then none in West Sea Shelter, Davis Bay. So as we're getting applications in, that could be something that's used to screen what we consider. Whoop. Go back, and then. So in moving forward then, what we would do from here after getting input on this is I can revise the policy and bring it back to a council meeting. I could do it concurrently with proposed zoning bylaw amendments. We'd also update the business license to reflect whatever kind of policy or regulations you want to see move forward. And then the fees and charges bylaw amendments. For both cannabis and for any kind of liquor license, the district doesn't actually have a fee structure. So when we are going into public consultation and doing any kind of ads or notification, we're actually eating the cost on that, and it's hundreds when it's into ads in the paper and our notification. So we are going to change that and bring that forward to you. And the other I would like some guidance on is in terms of if there's requirement for additional consultation, if that would make sense to do either a separate consultation process, we could do online survey, we could do a number of things, or if it would make sense, similar to what we did on the previous bylaw amendments, was we actually had kind of an informal session just before the council meeting, so an option there. And in terms of timing, if it would make sense to deal with it just with the policy, or whether it would make sense to do more consultation when there's actually something more specific on the zoning. So that's a lot of questions to you. So I just wanted, before we kind of solidify this into anything, is just to get some thoughts on how to proceed with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Any questions, discussion? Oh, Darnelda.
Thank you. So I'm not quite clear about the C1, C2, and C3. So downtown core is C2? What is a C1?
They refers to the map schedule,
oh,
not
okay,
the zone.
okay.
That's why. Okay. And the reason I actually had that is because in C2, which brings in everything like East Porpoise Bay, up Tuanak, and Sandy Hook, it was proposing that there not be anything under any of the designations under there. So that's why I made it specific to it's only that designation on that particular map schedule, so it doesn't open it up to a broader area as opposed to a zone.
So it's C1 map, C2 zone.
Correct.
In the OCP. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that clarifies that piece. So currently we have one that we've got a temporary use permit for in Seashell Inlet Crescent.
Correct.
Okay. So then under this policy, they would not be conforming.
Correct, for non-medical.
If it's
Yeah, for non-medical retail. And the reason being we don't really allow retail uses in the industrial area.
Yes. Okay. Okay, I'll leave it there for now. I have other questions, but let's see what else comes up.
Anyone else? Matt?
I think this restriction on the locations is a little bit severe, particularly, well, let's start with the area around parks and schools. I don't see the justification for picking Hackett Park and not Friendship Park. In my mind, they are exactly the same. And the only reason we're not picking Friendship Park right now is because it's too close to existing commercial. So in my mind, to make the policy consistent, make it only around schools and remove that Hackett Park. Provided that map, it wouldn't change a whole lot with current zoning, but I would like to see commercial fill in some of the area towards Hackett Park over the next 30 years. So thinking long-term, I think it could be an appropriate spot for some of these stores. So I would like the Hackett Park removed.
So I guess that would mean the Mission Point Park would also be part of that? In your thoughts?
Yeah, remove all parks, just schools would be the only restriction in my mind. I would like to see this moving forward.
Sure, I'll go next. On page 4 in the report, and you mentioned it in your remarks, you talk about a text amendment to the zoning bylaw as a conditional use. I don't see anything here about things like odor, you know, the requirements, security, the signage, the, you know, what can be on the windows, what can't be on the windows. Where would that show up inside of the process?
Through the chair, there's a couple of things, and I think with something like this, we'd probably have a little bit of redundancy in that we'd approach it the same way with short-term rental. So when the approach we're wanting to take with that is we have a number of conditions written into our business license that deals with things like the hours of operation, signage, the requirement for odor mitigation. Those kind of things can be written into that. They can be duplicated into the zoning as well of meeting those conditions. We found from a bylaw enforcement process that it helped to have it written into both, not just cross-reference the business license with the zoning. It just made it really clear what's allowed. So we could do it in both. The other I have seen is some places have done it just through their application process. They've required certain submissions for anything coming before council. So some have requested that you have a security plan in place, and they'll establish who's qualified to do one. They may have a mitigation plan around how you're going to manage odor that comes with that submission. So there can be things there that we can actually ask for, and then you can be assured that they're meeting that. So it can hit in a number of areas as to what we regulate.
So follow up. So you're seeing this policy as a starting place, and there would be others coming forward, or other information coming forward?
Yes, I would see the policy as setting out the agreed to direction on how we would go about it. I'd need to bring a zoning bylaw amendment forward, if only to add the use, because under the zoning bylaw, if it's not a listed use, it's not allowed. So we could have adding in non-medical cannabis into the C2 zone, subject to the agreed upon conditions.
Okay, and one of the things that I noticed was, as you indicated, when somebody applies to the province, it actually has to come back to the municipality. We have to give either affirmative or deny it. But part of that is public consultation.
It is. They're very directive on that, that if you are going to give a recommendation, and not just zone it out of your community. There's obligations to do public consultation. They list a number of options for whether it's under your standard notification process, ads in the paper, some go to a public hearing on them, but they set a standard that you absolutely have to consult on it.
So I don't see that necessarily in this policy. Would that come forward separately as well, or would you want to include something like that in here?
There are two ways I can bring that forward. It can either be part in the policy itself, but I can also add, I can do both, but in our procedures guide, we have a guide of here's how we'll do it, and so we would create one for non-medical cannabis, and so it would indicate when we consult, how we consult, whether we're doing the, applying the 100-meter notification, or whether it's an ad in the paper, or both, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Right, because under preliminary report to council, you indicate that, we would see if we want to support it and consider public consultation required. But I think what I understood from the information that came out on this is that we have to be very specific about what our process is going to be. Correct. So that everybody knows, so that we would need some more detail at some point around that.
Okay. Is there, can I ask council, is there any preference on how we would do this in terms of whether it's notice in paper or an area notification like we do with the liquor applications? It's 100-meter in urban, it's 300-meter in rural. We wouldn't allow it in rural, so that's irrelevant. Or to do both if it makes sense to do both on this.
I'd say both. I think notice in paper and then the 100-meter.
I'm okay with that too. Sounds like there's consensus across the table here.
That's it? Okay. Oh, go ahead, Matt, and then we'll move back.
Question on use inside of these retail spaces. Is there provincial regulation around only selling cannabis products? That's...
Through the chair, yes, they're quite restrictive right now. I don't know if they'll ease up on it, but it's quite restrictive that it is very similar to a liquor store. It's the cannabis product and some accessory products, but they're very confined in it, and no edibles at this point. I think they are looking into that, but whether it comes back with it, I'm not sure. But they are quite restrictive on it in terms of other products.
And you mentioned the edibles. What's the approach for edibles? Are we going to wait to see what the province comes out with? Or can we craft this policy knowing that some kind of edibles will be permitted at some point?
Through the chair, that's a provincial licensing thing. I'm not sure we really want to regulate what their inventory is. If it's retail, it's retail. I'm not sure we'd get into that, but it's certainly a condition of their licensing, so the province will weigh in on that much more than we do. And also it means if we're setting it, we also need to enforce it, and I'm not sure we'd want to go down that road. Thanks.
Back to Darnell.
Thank you. Page 6, you talk about form and character. You've got information in there about store names, signage, and display material, etc., and the storefronts, so blank window coverings. Would that also be coming forward in an amendment to the sign bylaw or something then, or where does this show up? Some of it is signage, but the rest is more, I think it's form and character or something. So where would that be laid out?
We can do it in a couple of ways. One is adding to the GP area ones, because they'd be subject to the commercial DP regulations around that. We already have certain requirements in our sign bylaw that prohibit the papering of it. So we may, we cover off quite a bit of this. What we may do in the updated sign bylaw is be a little more specific on it, but the province also regulates what kind of signage and logos and language that can go into the signage.
So following up on the form and character comment, in here it's proposed that there's no blank window coverings or blackout window coverings. In current cannabis retail or medicinal cannabis stores, there seems to be two approaches. One is the more welcoming, this is a regular store, and the other is this is very much blacked out and not part of the community. I want council to be clear on which way we want to go, because they are quite different, and I think they both have their merits. I lean more towards what's written in the bylaw, but I just want to see if anyone has contrary thoughts on that one.
Anyone? Oh, okay.
I guess I'm not really clear on what the provincial and federal regulations are around it. You know, as you indicated, they do come out and say you can do this, you can't do this. I don't know what that is and how that would actually apply here and what we can do one way or another.
There aren't too many overlaps with our sign bylaw. They're more concerned with marketing to youth, having anything that looks like the product in the signage, and using any language that suggests medical or dispensary or clinic, anything like that. They're very strict on that kind of language in non-medical retail.
Just to weigh on Matt's question there, I would prefer not blacked out. I don't think it looks right. I think it looks secretive. As far as form and character goes, I'd rather everything be out in the open myself.
I agree.
I agree.
So there's direction there, I guess. Back to Matt.
So biggest concern with this overall is the limit on the number of stores. We don't do this in any other industry in Sechelt. Do we say you can only have so many liquor stores?
There's a limit. The Liquor Control Board actually puts that on.
The Liquor Control Board, but not Sechelt.
Not Sechelt, no. The Liquor Control Board. Yeah.
Okay. So question is, the Liquor and Cannabis Control Board now, they wouldn't be proposing that. They're leaving it to municipalities to determine rather than taking the liquor route where they determine.
It's interesting because they do restrict on the liquor license. I haven't read anything from the province or the feds that they're moving to restrict the numbers yet. I don't know if that would be something they would do in the future of control it. Maybe that they're not quite sure what the optimal will be like because there isn't a proven market in a lot of areas, but I haven't seen anything suggesting they would at this point.
So I feel like our approach is come up with a number that's probably higher than market demand and let the market figure it out. Not the most scientific approach. I don't know what else you can do. So I just don't like being very prescriptive when we don't need to be. So I'd almost be in favor of removing that restriction, recognizing that once we remove it, it's very hard to go back and put in a restriction once we have 18 businesses operating, if it ever came to that. So welcome other comments on that one.
I struggle that the provincial government or federal government, for that matter, has left this to the municipality to decide. I don't think it's fair. I would prefer that they took the same route as they do with the liquor stores, and there's only so many licenses, and that's what it is. My personal opinion is 6 is plenty. I agree it's tough to remove it and then put a restriction in later. So maybe what we do is we leave it at 6 with the option to increase it if we decide at a later date. But for now, I think for what we have, 6 is lots. Over to Amanda.
I'd go with 6 as well. This is a policy. So policy can be changed down the road fairly easily. Actually, it comes to council. We change it, it goes back. So it gives us some place to start. I agree. I'm okay with 6.
Anybody else want to weigh in?
I think 6 is more than enough. Based on even on the area that we're dealing with, it doesn't seem like 6 seems adequate for sure.
How many applications have we actually received? 2? I think 6. I mean, it seems a bit early and arbitrary, but I think it gives us the best flexibility and at least gives us a starting point.
Follow up on that question. 2 have come to us from the province. Is that what you're saying? Okay. I didn't know if your question was how many more applications have we had? I mean, we've had emails, but I haven't seen anything come forward. Yeah. Good. Thanks.
Through the chair, in terms of the application process, it only comes from the province. They can't apply to us directly.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh, go ahead.
Just a comment there. To you, or what are you looking to us to do? You just were looking for feedback and you're going to bring this forward with some revisions, or do you need us to make any kind of motion here?
I'd like a motion in terms of authorizing, I'll do an update to it and bring it back to council along with the zoning amendments, and just to make sure I've got the direction that you want. In terms of land use, you're okay with the OCP designations in the C2. In terms of separation distance, we would eliminate the park and do school only at 150 meters. In terms of the number of establishments, leaving it at 6, and is the allocation that's in there okay, and then to be revisited at another time. Form and character, I'll clarify on the signage, and I'll add a section on the public consultation process. Is that largely okay?
And you are going to be looking at, I think that's separate from this, but you're going to be looking at fees and charges as well.
Those are in separate, so I'd need to make changes to the business license bylaw, our BENS bylaw, the enforcement one, to allow us to do that, and the fees and charges.
Okay. So
that would be once you've kind of approved. It can go concurrently, but it would need to be, you need to be comfortable with what we're doing and as to what that would look like. What will really drive the fees and charges too is really the consultation process, to make sure we're covering that, because there's a reporting, there's notification in the paper, the notification around the area.
And also bylaw enforcement. And building inspection. Because they'll have to, right, all of that. Okay, and so you'd like a motion for the other piece that you said first?
The motion would be to...
Yes, I'll make that motion that you say. It's about the number of locations.
To direct staff to revise the policy to confirm the land use, address the separation distance, confirm the number of establishments, and reflect the desired public consultation process.
Thank you, it sounds good. Okay.
All in favor? Does that work for you? Perfect. Okay, perfect. On to the next item, item 5.3. Motion to receive the report from Doug, and over to you, sir. Second, all in favor? There you go.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So This report is to the next step in the financial plan budget deliberations, primarily looking today at the general fund operating budget and ultimately the property tax rate increase. So just a little bit of history and how we got to here. So through the budget process, information was presented to Council in December. We had our public budget meetings in January. Council did approve some early capital items just to allow us to get moving on them. We're now in this period where Council is deliberating the financial plan. Ultimately, by May 15th or prior to May 15th, Council needs to establish the financial plan and the tax, sewer, and solid waste rates for 2019. So where we were when we last left off, this was in December, we're looking at a property tax increase of 10.54%, with growth of $147,000. That brought it down to 8.81% property tax increase. This is for operations, by the way. It does include the 3% for capital. Since then, Council has approved a $147,000 increase for the library funding, part of that being funded from surplus. So we're at a 9.95% tax increase. Then I said the 3% property tax increase for capital. So we're at a property tax proposed increase of 12.95%. Since then, we received, I'll say, a fair bit of public input and consultation, but most were really centered around this property tax increase just being too large and to do something about it, with very little concrete examples of what to do. So with that, we went through the budget and looked at areas where we could reduce them from our perspective without limiting operations too much, and utilizing reserves that we had to allow us to do what we were intending to do, because no one really said we shouldn't do what we intended, simply just don't raise taxes as much. So the proposal is to look at reducing taxes. So also in the budget was an additional list of $137,000 in projects. This would have added a 1.62% tax increase on top of the 12.95. So as I said, we were looking at what could we do to reduce the total property tax increase. What we looked at here was be able to reduce the request by 4.25%. This was done by reducing the budget requests by 1.45%, $124,000, and then funding about $289,000 from reserves. That would be a 2.8% tax rate reduction for there. I should point out at this point, just in case you're following it and you see the numbers in here, on page 13 of the budget, it's a typo, so the totals don't add up, so I thought I should point out where it is. The building inspector, I had the entire amount being funded from reserve of $111,000 since the report was done, or since in discussion with the director of planning. It was felt that, I wrote this in the report, that we could get away with a $75,000 budget for that. So just for changes that, so the budget reduction of $36,605 and a reduction of reserves of $75,000. So the totals on the slide here are correct and should be reflected at the bottom of that page. So just to help you follow along there. As far as the additional requests, we're proposing reducing $107,000 out of the budget and simply keeping two items in there. The Seashell Marsh, $10,000. That's essentially because we've stopped the funding towards the Seashell Heritage Group. Yeah. So we've taken over maintenance of the marsh. We really should have the funding that was approved by council last year to start, and then to look at increasing the budget this year. And the seniors planning table to a grant is actually of $20,000, and that being funded from reserves as well. So rather than going through the details of each line item here, and hopefully I detailed it well enough in the report so you understand why we made the changes, I thought I'd really focus on why I made this proposal, why I'm comfortable making this recommendation to you. So if you look at our non-statutory reserves, this is the estimated balances at the end of 2018. We have this other reserves, about $1.1 million. This is essentially surplus funds that this district has. It's been earmarked for other things. One for committed expenditures, that's for money that gets carried over from year to year. One called the Development Fee Equalization Reserve. and some other ones that really, it's just earmarked money, but it is just surplus money. So we do have that $1.1 million in that reserve. So looking at how that reserve kind of played out this year, the balance at the beginning of the year was $970,000. It's now up to 1.1 million. So an increase of $200,000 in 2018 into that reserve. Of that, budget was carried over. Oh, there's another typos all over the place today. That should be $126,000 of budget money being carried over from last year that needs to be spent in 2019, just unspent money basically. We also had excess revenue from building inspection, about $80,000. This is just in 2018 only. And some in planning, we had some unspent consulting and supply money, about $51,000. And we used $56,000 out of this reserve. So because of that, the fact that we were able to increase the reserve by $200,000 in 2018 alone, and assuming some development activity keeps up the way it is, and in many ways, particularly on the building inspection side, you get the money up front and then the work happens the next year. So in some ways it makes sense to fund the additional staff using the reserve of money that you received in the prior year and carried over. We talked about it and felt if it keeps up after perhaps 2 or 3 years of this, we could then look at possibly making it a full-time permanent position. But if development activity drops off, we simply stop funding from reserves. So the total funding of the reserves over the 3 years is $479,000. That's also because, I guess I just kind of jumped over this, on the development engineer position, proposing that 1/4 of it be funded from, it will only be funded half a position for 2018 or 2019 on the assumption that we won't hire the position until July. So 1/4 funded from tax, 1/4 funded from reserves. Next year, increase the funding from tax by 1/4, 3/4 in 2021, fully funded in 2022, and use the reserves to feather in that tax increase, simply to lessen the impact. So it's about a 0.3% tax increase each year to get that position permanent. So that's what those additional amounts coming out of 2020 and 2021 are. So really, as I said, I feel comfortable making this recommendation, even using $400,000 of reserve money. I feel we're in a comfortable position, and it does allow us to keep the tax rate down to a number that's probably more reasonable and palatable by yourself and the citizens. And the last couple slides I had for you were just some information so you were aware of sort of where we've been at and where we're going. So a lot of people have been concerned about the property tax increase over the last few years, and certainly the last couple of years it's probably been higher than usual. But as you can see, in 2009, 14, and 15, property taxes actually went down in those 3 years. So if you look at the property tax increase for operations on average over a 10-year period, it's 1.8%. Canadian CPI has gone up 1.58% in that same period. I've also included what's known as the Edmonton Municipal Price Index. This is a calculation Edmonton does looking at the cost increases of things that municipalities typically buy that a normal household would not, labor, asphalt, building materials, etc. And you can see they've indicated the 10-year average of that's about 2.59%. So we're certainly below what Edmonton's calculated as the municipal price index. So although we've had some larger increases recently, in prior years we actually went down, and we're now offsetting those. We're trying to catch up from those reductions. And the last slide I wanted to show you, and it's I'm not trying to twist things or minimize what we're done, but just it was a comment that I've heard from a few people, so I wanted to put things into perspective here. What this shows in that first column is the total budget of money we receive from levies from all levels of government and our various fees and charges. So you can see the top there, we've got municipal taxes, solid waste, sewer, parcel tax, and user fees, about $11.8 million. The regional district collects about $5.6 million. Then we've got the hospital, fire, school, assessment authority, and finance authority. So the total collected in fees and charges from our taxpayers is $24.7 million. So you can see the district share of that's about 49 or 48%. The regional district about 23%. Where this plays in is when, and I think when people are concerned, when we were talking about an 8% tax increase, they're thinking of a tax increase of 8% on their total tax bill. But it's not, it's 8% on the district's 40%. So that last column really shows what the impact would be on a person's total property tax bill of what we're doing. So that 8.8% would mean a person's total tax bill would go up 3% because of the district's share of it. The regional district, I use the 214. I think it might be a little higher than that. That's the number that Ms. Perot gave us on her presentation here. I've never seen anything official from her, but you can see that 6% would translate to just under a 1% tax increase on the total tax bill. We haven't seen what the increases may be yet for fire, school, and those other ones, so they will certainly impact it and cause them to go up. But I just wanted to put it into perspective because I've heard some differing comments from people, and I think people thinking that they were looking at their total tax bill and thinking it would be going up 8% because of the district, and that's just not the case. So that's really the end of the presentation. As I said, I wasn't going to go through each of the details here. What I'm really looking for is concurrence from this committee if you're comfortable with what's being proposed. At this point, honestly, if you gave me the go-ahead now, I wouldn't intend to bring back the operating budget for any further discussion. I would go with the tax increase as proposed of 8.82% total, and be coming back with a report to have you look at how you might want to allocate that, whether that would be 8.82 across the board, or whether you'd want to shift the burden from commercial to residence or residence to commercial, or any other changes on that. So at this point, if you're comfortable with what's being presented, we can move forward. If you're not, any suggestion from the committee would be welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open up to you guys to start if you have some questions to.
So if a job is funded, then we use money from reserves but it's still part of the operating budget. So you can actually fill that job as an ongoing position. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to like, a contract position?
We could, yes. It could potentially be laid off, or we would come with a funding proposal in the future if we felt the need to keep it going on a permanent basis, but yes. But
they would be hired as if it was an ongoing position without an end date?
Yes.
Right? Okay, thanks.
Tom? Did you? Okay. Okay.
Just going back to Brenda's question. So you say the funding's going down from reserves for the position. What happens after that third year? You would come to council, and then it would be brought as a tax increase again, or you would?
Sorry, I guess actually there's two positions here. So one was the development engineer, which was be hired as a full-time position, and the funding from reserve would go down, the funding from taxation would go up. And so that would be the strategy that we're asking you to endorse today, that we would increase the funding by 0.25% over the next 4 years to ultimately fill the position or fund the position fully from taxation. On the building inspection side, the proposal was, because it's from reserve, is actually we wouldn't be hiring a full-time person. What was being proposed by the Director of Planning and Development is that we use a contract person or a part-time person to fill the job with some administrative assistant help as well. And we actually have these people on board today. So they're casual employees, so there is no long-term relationship with them. So we wouldn't enter into a long-term relationship until it was deemed a full-time position was required, and we would bring that request to you. If that makes sense. So it's two positions we're looking for, funded differently.
Councilor McLean.
Sorry, could you just clarify the building inspector? You have a casual position that could transition into a part-time position already? Or you have a casual person that?
We have a casual person now, essentially been covering because of some sick leaves and with Mr. Hart leaving, going to Gibson. So he's on board now, and the idea would be to keep him along longer if we could.
Okay, great. That really, satisfies one of my major concerns, is the challenge of hiring part-time people.
The 3% reserve, what does that equate to in dollars? Like I calculate about 260,000-ish over and above. So over and above this, where you wanted to, the plan is to add 3% for
capital renewal.
For capital reserve.
Yes, that's the 355,000.
$255,000. So, and that money goes into those reserve funds as you listed up there, correct? That's correct?
No, that 255 would go to capital funding.
Okay,
which
just the capital fund.
Yes, and that'll be a discussion next week when we look at using the current money for capital plus money that's in reserve to fund the 5-year plan. So.
Just when I look at 290,000 coming out of reserve, and it seems like we're trading dollars here, so just different reserve funds then.
It is different reserve, and the strategy with capital was to ultimately use current dollars to fund our capital renewal. So we're trying to increase the amount of current taxation that's going towards capital funding. When I came, we had no current money going to capital funding at all, and we're trying to build that up. So.
Okay. Next.
Follow up on that. So I think the question was, we're actually taking 3% and putting that to capital reserve, right? And then we're taking operating reserves and using them to do operations. So it just seems counterintuitive that we would tax 3% and spend 3%.
Yeah. I think you've got to stop thinking of the 3% as going to capital reserve. It's really just the semantics. Any money that comes in from capital goes into the capital reserve, then all capital funding comes out of that reserve. But is now the capital fund has about $800,000 of current money being spent. The reserve only has $700,000 in it. So of the 3% that's going to capital reserve, we're spending half of it this year as well, immediately. So it's really going to capital expenditures, but it's the accounting wise, I put it into reserve and then take it out again but it's going directly to capital spending, and when we're spending more in capital than we're taxing for at this point.
I had a question about the Sechelt Marsh safety maintenance. I know the Marsh Society spent $500 a year or something is what we gave them. It was minimal. They came to us last year and requested some safety improvements because some of the fencing and some of the, I guess some of the edging and whatever was, falling apart and needed to be fixed up. So we've got $10,000 in here again. Is that looking to be an ongoing amount, or are we looking to get some work caught up so that at some point the maintenance as we're doing isn't going to be necessarily as high?
Mr. Schmidt may be able to answer better, but my understanding was it was an annual $10,000 expenditure to maintain that marsh.
When the Sunshine Coast Natural History Society approached us last year for safety upgrades, I came to council and they agreed that we would assist them, and we did the 3 immediate safety concerns. There are still other concerns, so our thought would be the 10,000 would be ongoing until we caught up. That could be influenced by grants that were received by the Sunshine Coast Natural History Society, and that actually helped us out last year quite a bit when they received a $5,000 grant and allowed us to finish the retaining wall safety border around the entire pond well ahead of time. There are still some serious erosion issues that are going to take quite a bit of money, and that's slated for this year. There's also some dredging, which isn't a serious safety issue, but for the health of the pond and the health of the park would be necessary as well. There's a long list. So I think that we would probably see it for the next couple of years and then maybe be able to back off from that.
Councilor McLean, you had a question?
Anything else on the marsh? Okay, so jumping back to using reserves, part of my job as a councillor is to explain to the public why their tax rates are going up. We're going to have a really hard time justifying why their tax rates are going up in 3 years, because that's how long it's going to take of increases to pay for this development engineer. So essentially what's happening is we're going to hire somebody in July. We'll get an increase in service or maintain our current service levels. But in 3 years, people's taxes are going to go up, and we're going to have nothing to show for it. I'd much rather bite the bullet, say, we need this position, we're going to increase your taxes, And we're increasing your taxes to fund this position. If we do it over 3 years, we're making the decision now to increase people's taxes in 3 years. And when 3 years comes, we don't really have anything to show the public. So it's unfortunate, but like, I'd much rather be honest with the public and say, we need this, we're gonna increase your taxes, and we're not gonna do this, like, there's quite a bit of accounting within this position in particular. And it's deceiving the truth of what we need in the district. We need a development engineer. We need to increase our engineering capacity. And that's the message we should be sending out to the public, saying that we need this, and it's gonna take a hit, but it's the way it is, rather than phasing it in over 3 years, taking from reserves and making it work in a much less transparent manner.
Any other councillors have some thoughts on those?
I would argue that we're not being transparent, because I think Mr. Stewart said that there would be a tax increase over the next 3 years of 0.25% or something like that. So that, to me, that's transparency. We're putting it out there that that is what is proposed. And I hear what you're saying, but I also hear that there are lots of things on the table. And I think, I'm almost guessing that with my limited knowledge around development, but that a development engineer could potentially bring us value over those 3 years that, you know, would offset that increase, potentially. I mean, we don't know. So I don't necessarily disagree that this is, that with what you're saying, Matt, but I also, I'm not totally against going this route. I think it's, might be a happy medium to give the engineering planning department the support that they need.
Mayor Caesar.
I think that one of the things we've asked for, and I think it's been in development, and we'll be having a conversation later, is the justification, the business case for a development engineer. I think we've received it for the administration and facilities coordinator. That was part of the information we received before. I understand what we're doing with the building inspector. I mean, we are short one now. We're going to add another one. I think the advertisement's out already and whatever, so we'll add that one, and we'll look at. That's a replacement. Yeah, it's a replacement for John Hart, right? So we would have 2 full-time, and then we would look at temporarily, because as we know, building goes up and down. We don't know. We have had in the past 3 building inspectors, but the last few years we've been operating with 2, and even that we've had some off sick and different kinds of things. So I don't think there's been a period in the last while where we've actually had 2 on for any length of time. So we do have a backlog. We know that. We don't know how long that backlog will be in place. So I understand bringing a building inspector on, you know, as part-time to help catch up with that backlog and identify whether or not it's something that's needed ongoingly. Totally makes sense. But I don't think as a council we've heard the rationale for the development engineer. I believe that there is need in that area, but I think that's a conversation that we haven't had necessarily at this table. So I'd look to staff to bring more information forward on that. Thanks.
Yeah. One of the things that's kind of coming up on the horizon is, as the building codes change, when you come in with your plans, everything has to be engineered. And basically, what happens with our building department is they're putting the onus on the developer or the owner of that building to take all the risk, kind of thing. So I guess in my case, what's happening, and I'm doing a building right now, and what I've been told is that the building inspectors, we are giving them an opportunity to come through our building and look at it, and they walk through and they say, yeah, everything looks like it's in place, but there's so many engineers involved that the engineers sign off on that project. So the reality, you know, I'm not going to say the building inspectors, you know, where before they could come in and spend 3 or 4 hours in there, it's basically they can walk through with a piece of paper, but the reality is they might not know what they're looking at. I mean, they say, yes, that got 25 nails in it, and that's great, but there's engineers that sign off on it. So the time spent by our building inspectors or engineers on these projects I think has a potential to diminish. You know, I just sort of see that as a potential where before they'd say, okay, we need to allocate 8 hours for this job. Well, now they allocate 4 hours for that job. And when you're doing a development, if you're coming in for ground servicing, putting in your sewer and water and all that, it's all signed off by an engineering firm. And the negotiation is with our engineering department here, but it's the engineering firm that says, yes, this is how we're doing it. And the developer does it that way, and then the engineer signs off on it. So I'm just, you know, it's one of these things where we're just going through a changing time, where I would, you know, in 2 years or 3 years, are we going to need that person? Because as the you know, it becomes more onerous on the property owner, the developer, to put his plans together. You know, how much is the, you know, district going to be responsible? So
I'll move to Councillor McLean then.
Okay, so is staff able to quantify a backlog in the building inspection? Because my understanding is that we're responding fairly quickly. Councillor Lamb spoke to his personal experience. I'm wondering, do we have any way to quantify that need or that backlog?
Through the chair. So in terms of the building inspection, and I think Councillor Lamb is talking about two different systems. We will always have an engineer doing the site services. That's not a building inspection issue. In terms of doing the buildings, we do have backlog in certain areas, and particularly business licensing. We do inspections on that, and that has been backlogged. There are a number of, in any building, there are a number of times that they go out. So getting the second callback, the third callback can add time to a development, because we only have one person right now available to do that. The other thing that's changing in terms of the code is actually going the opposite direction, and that is imposing some additional criteria around the qualifications, particularly getting a level 3 building inspector to sign off on more complex buildings, and the district is seeing more development with more complex buildings. We are lucky with the contract person we have that is able to do that kind of plan review for us. We have a very difficult time attracting a level 3 here, so I'm able to use a contract person who has worked in the district before. He doesn't do the site visits, but is able to do the plan checking on things like the BC Supportive Housing Project, Green Court, that sort of thing, which goes beyond the skill base of the existing ones. They can only take it so far. So the complexity of the code and the changing building permits will add to that. So I think in the system that we were proposing is not necessarily having 3 full-time, but having the 2, and having the contract person who can do the level 3 plan review and also mentor for the, if I'm bringing in someone who isn't at the level 2 yet.
So follow up on Councillor Lamb and Councillor McLean. What it sounds like is you're actually in support of the proposal as presented, where we have 2 full-time and then we have 1 part-time, but that could be temporary, to allow for changes coming forward in the future. Is that correct?
Just thinking. Was that a yes?
Mine isn't made up yet.
Okay.
I'm looking for more conversation.
Anything else from the other councillors? Councillor Lamb?
Yeah, I'm just, once again, going back to reserves. It says we have $1.171 million in, I think that's unrestricted reserves.
Essentially, yes. We called them is other reserves. There's other non-restricted reserves, but they're very specifically earmarked. Gaming money, public safety. So these are ones that are just essentially earmarked surplus.
Yeah. And so we're looking at taking $479,000 out of that
over the next 3 years. Yes.
Over the next 2 years. So I'm just, you know, I guess I'm quite concerned about the reserves, because that would leave us, say, with $700,000 in unrestricted reserves. And I know for myself, like, I like to have some money in reserves. So how do we build that reserves up? The only way we build reserves is by raising taxes. Is that correct?
Yes. Again, I'm comfortable, and part of it because even though it's budgeted to take almost $500,000 out, we actually put $200,000 in increased revenue over this past year. So the assumption is that if that increased revenue is still there, that would justify keeping the building inspector on for another year. If that revenue dropped off, likely that building inspector wouldn't be required, and we could drop that request. Also, within the budget is also, and this may get back to the Peter and Paul thing, we do have a budgeted surplus of $150,000 as well. So although we're taking money out of the reserve, we budgeted an overall surplus of $150,000. And we also have a $100,000 contingency for unexpected expenditures as well. So that's built into the budget in addition to drawing from reserves. So when you balance it all out, much of it's more the accounting. We're really looking at drawing perhaps $100,000, $150,000 out of the reserve this year. Net.
So
net.
So I'm just kind of wondering, like, what would our unrestricted reserves have been, say, 3 years ago? You know,
I think they're around $2 million, but I'm not absolutely sure. We stopped. We only drew last year. I can't remember the number now. A couple $100,000 in 2018. $145,000, sorry, in 2018. Nothing in 2017. Prior to 2016 and earlier, we were drawing from reserves or general surplus. But
I'm just gonna, go ahead.
So it sounds like there may not be appetite to move this forward this meeting. If that's the case, how would you like us to proceed?
Okay, so basically there's a couple things that I see on the table that we kind of need to decide on. And one, as Mayor Seegers stated, the business case for the development engineer, something formal in that regard needing to come forward to us. And then decision amongst the council as to the suggestion of just biting the bullet and funding, if we move forward with it, funding it wholly this year, and rather than play around with some now and some out of reserves and then stepping up. I can see it both ways. So is there anything more that we kind of need to discuss on that? Go ahead.
So I understand the logic of funding the building inspector through reserves, given that it could be temporary in nature. I think the current proposal is to split it into two, half-time building inspector, half-time administrative support. I really like that administrative support. I think that could really make the building inspection department a lot more efficient and focus on building inspection and let somebody else focus on the other stuff. So I'm wondering if we can fund the administrative part from operations and fund the building inspector from reserves, recognizing that I think there's a longer term need for the administrative support. Welcome thoughts on that from council.
Go ahead. I'll jump in. The administrative support, again, that's another casual position as part of that 75,000. So it was meant to be a part-time on-call as well. So I don't think, unless you're actually proposing that we hire another administrative assistant, that wasn't in the proposal at this point.
Just to clarify, so I have someone working to give some administrative support on doing things like the notice on title, the remediation orders, because she has that experience. I don't think it'd be efficient to have admin support other than that particular person doing that particular job. It would take too long to train on it. She was our previous admin support for the planning and building department, so I just have her in 2 days a week. But she's able to clear through the business licenses and that sort of thing because she comes with a very unique training. So that's the only way I would actually support the admin position. I wouldn't do a general. It wouldn't be efficient.
I think we need more information on this position because previously we were looking at just a full-time building inspector. So this is new to us, and that's really the first I've heard of any kind of job description for an admin here.
Just to clarify, the building inspector position that we have out now is a replacement. It's not an addition. And instead of asking for another FTE to do the third person in building inspection, I'm suggesting that we have the two contract positions that add up to the 75,000. That gives me the admin support and the level 3 building inspector in on a part-time basis.
So this is very specific skills. So this is a person who has the skills, has previous experience, and can come in not as a full-time, not ongoing, right? Again, looking at dealing with backlog, dealing with getting us caught up, and being able to then evaluate whether or not it is something that has to be ongoing. Okay. If we brought in somebody who's an EA who doesn't have the background, it's probably going to take more time to get them up to speed than, you know, and then I don't know, that would take more time of other staff at this point.
Anybody else? Go on.
So I'd really like to talk about the other position. Sorry, I just lost it. The administration facilities coordinator. We currently have a external contract with somebody, and it seems like a pretty ideal situation. Looking at the option of signing an external contract with somebody else to do very similar work and save us a 0.77% tax increase. Focus on what we need, which is the facilities coordination.
Okay, so this one does have a business case laid out. Have you read the business case that's presented? Because it's looking at more than just a facilities coordinator. It's looking at assistance for communications and for event coordination internally, right? Thanks.
So I'm proposing just focus on the facilities. I think that's the most absolute need within this area, and considering really scaling back this position to what we absolutely need, which is the facilities.
I don't think that's our call. Sorry. I think that's more of a staff decision around that. It's, are we going to fund it, or are we not going to fund it? And then staff will actually determine the operational impact and implications and where it gets used. So we either fund it or we don't. That's the decision up to us.
So we don't.
I don't agree. So it sounds like we need more conversation at this table on some of these.
Okay, so go ahead.
I'm kind of leaning towards, you know, for the facilities coordinator, like the public has said to us, they don't want us to raise taxes as much. So do we really need that? I'm kind of in that same situation. Where do we really need, as a taxpayer myself, do we really need this? And is it worth that much of a increase for our district? And just hearing from the public, I'm not sure that we actually need it.
You? No.
Sure. So it sounds like we want more information on both the administration facilities coordinator and the development engineer. Is that correct? Yeah.
I'm going to try and make that a little more specific. Looking at how we could minimize this position to either a part-time or a contract. So looking at alternate options for this position, and looking for staff to make a recommendation on what is needed, like you mentioned, but funding it at either contract level, external contract level, or part-time level.
Along with the rationale for making it a position as a full-time equivalent. So contrasted, okay? I'm okay with that.
Did you want me to address it now? Sorry, I feel like a rock star. We could hire a part-time person, and that part-time person would be responsible for the booking and management of our facilities. I'm wondering, though, what hours we would propose that person work. Right? So if we have a part-time person who's maybe working, I don't know, 8 to noon or only 3 days a week, who is managing the booking of the facilities when that person's not here? Because currently we're already looking at, I wonder who's going to go over on Saturday night when the person who's booked the facility can't get the door locked. So there's logistics, no matter whether it's a part-time person or a full-time person. But part-time, I think, would be extremely challenging, and we would be left with only renting out our facilities when our facilities person is working. The other option you said was to put it out to a contract. We could absolutely do that. We'd have to put out an RFP, and we would have to stipulate exactly what we want that person to do. What we're proposing in the full-time person is to have somebody who was responding to the community's needs, making recommendations to council on, we need a commercial kitchen. This is what the community wants. This is why it's going to be better. And those kinds of things, so that we can make sure that the facilities that we have are actually meeting the needs of our community. That person would also market the facilities in an attempt to ensure that they are fully booked all of the time and we're receiving maximum amount of revenue. Also having a look at what are we charging for our facilities and are those appropriate costs. So hopefully through a qualified person, we can manage all of that. If we put it out to RFP, you still have an expense. If you decide not to hire a person, but you decide to hire a contract person, you haven't necessarily saved any money.
So further to the concern about the part-time position, I'm unaware of this, are there any other part-time positions that could be combined into a full-time position at the District of Sechelt. And that's granularity I'm not aware of, so I'd welcome staff to come back with that. But looking at different options to make this work, I think we could figure out a way, but I'll leave that to staff to get a little creative with other methods of delivering this position.
So right now we have a facilities, we contracted out?
That's correct. There's a $50,000 budget, and we have someone who comes in and sets up, takes the booking, delivers the keys, et cetera, make sure it's kept clean. The $65,000 is to increase that budget to a full-time person.
So where does that money come out of when we look at our funding? Like, does that make, sorry, I'm not saying it right. Yeah, the 50,000 right now.
It's in the core budget now. So if you do nothing different, that money is in the budget, and we could continue with a contract person.
So if it's in the budget now, it's in this budget we're looking at right now?
Yes.
So you're saying 50,000 plus 65,000?
Correct, is the cost of the full-time person. This is the incremental cost to take it from a contract person to a full-time staff person.
I think there's a question as to what that covers.
I'm sorry?
So what, that also includes benefits?
Yes, that's wages and benefits.
And our expenses for employer costs?
That's part of the benefit cost, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Councillor Toth.
I'm actually okay with it. I know that the assistance to the communications department would probably be greatly appreciated. People expect near instantaneous results when they email in, or they tweet, or they Facebook message, or whatever. And so I think if people want to continue to expect anything like that, that we need a little more depth in the communications department. So.
Anybody else? I tend to agree. I think it makes sense. So I guess for direction, what's the recommend here? Oh.
If you wanted, you could just vote on whether to keep this position in now or not. It would sort of give us a clear direction as what you want to do.
On the communications or the facilities coordinator. So
I'll make a motion that it stay in as presented.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. And then for the development engineer, we're going to request that we get more information.
Business case for that.
Business case for that. Do we need a motion for that? All in favor? Opposed? Okay, so I think the rest carries as written, unless anybody else has any other comments. Go ahead.
Seniors planning table. Great group, would love to support them. How long are we going to continue to fund this organization? We're proposing that we fund it from reserves. Funding from reserves indicates a temporary level of support. So do we want to do something more long-term, or are we just going to continue this 1 year at a time, continually funding from reserves?
Mayor Seegers.
That's a conversation we've had at the regional district as well. So youth services are funded at the regional district through a service, through a regional function. Seniors aren't. And so the seniors planning table has made a request of the town of Gibsons and the regional district and the SIB to fund this year. And the other organizations are funding through grant and aid, or their grant and aid, I guess, like our community investment program this year. And that is a conversation we're going to have at the regional district around whether or not a service should be set up. In conjunction with that, there's also been, I think you were there at the presentation to the minister. So there was an MP that came out, Pamela Goldsmith-Jones brought the MP out responsible for seniors. And they're looking at our model to see if there's a way to fund that federally across the country. So I think at this point, we're looking at this as a stopgap measure for 1 year and have things play out over the year to see what next year would look like on a number of fronts. So I think it is temporary this year. And so I'm in favor of reserves for this year. And that's something that we would want to look at next year. Ongoing, I don't think we want to fund it from reserves. That doesn't work.
Fair enough.
Thanks.
Any other comments on it? Okay. I guess need any more direction, or is there anything else that we need to move on for this?
Mr. Chairman, I think for this item, no. I think I'll have to come back with another report, hopefully for the next meeting, and we can get this put to bed then.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for your patience on this. It's a big task. On to item 5.4, sewer fund operating budget deliberations. Move to receive. Seconder, all in favor? And back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This might be an easier discussion. When we last brought this to you, I don't have a PowerPoint for this one. We were looking at approximately $77,000 revenue requirement increase to balance the sewer fund. That would require a 3% fee increase, 5% if it was just to the user fees only. Since then, we've been looking at the numbers a little bit closer. We feel based on the history now, we've seen the septic disposal fee with the rate increase that we implemented about a year ago, that budget can be increased by about $63,000. We've also been in discussion with the Sechelt Indian Government District and the amount of sewage that they've been sending to the Water Resource Center, and they've agreed that they haven't been perhaps paying their full share of what was coming. So through discussion with them, they've agreed to pay an additional $34,000 this year than last year. So with those combined increases, in fact, the entire cost increase for the sewer fund is covered, and in fact, I'm suggesting that we can put an additional $20,000 towards capital expenditures as I'm again trying to get that amount of capital funded from sewer increase. So we can do all that and have no increase to sewer parcel tax or sewer levies. This doesn't change the fact that I'd still like to come back to you, and I know the mayor's been talking a lot about the septic fees and looking at what they're paying, but I think that can be done as a separate discussion. If you agree to this budget, this really covers the expenditure side of things. We can have a discussion in a couple of weeks as to far as how you'd like to share the costs or expenditures among septic haulers, parcel taxes, user fees. But at this point, really what I'm saying is we don't need to increase the fees for these groups at this point, or any fees at all at this point, if you endorse the plan as is. Thank you.
Well, there's a win. Go ahead.
I actually got sent an email I shared with staff today. I got sent an email from one of the directors at the regional district indicating that they'd just gotten wind of the fact that the Dusty Road site, I guess our lease expires in 2031. And there will be some required capital outlay that we're going to have to do. And the question was, is this being anticipated and incorporated in the septage costs that we are currently charging? And I mean, I took that to staff, and I think that's part of the question that we're looking at. We do have some capital outlay that we're doing on septage, which to date, I don't think we've separated out the budgets for sewer and septage. And I think getting a clearer picture on that will actually inform some of those costs and some of the capital that we'll need to gather for the next few years. So I look forward to seeing you bring that forward.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to follow up that general message in that the full budget for septage should be separate from sewer, not just reviewing the fees that you charge for it. I want to see like very much separated, and I think that's what the mayor was looking for as well.
Anybody else have a comment? Go ahead.
Okay, so I appreciate that we reviewed agreement with the SIGD. I understand we also have an agreement with the hospital to serve their sewer. And I'm wondering if that is going to be reviewed at some point, or if we have a contract, or how that process works.
Yes, right now we build them just through the number of beds. It's basically our bylaw. We build them per beds. Part of the discussion with the SIGD was to actually put meters in at the hospital and Friendship Park, where it comes in to actually properly meter what's happening, and then coming to you with a potential different way of billing them and bill them on a volume basis as opposed to a per bed charge is what the hospital's paying now.
Councilor Lamb, you had a question? Or comment?
No. I think my question was just answered. Yep, thank you.
Sounds good. Anybody else? All right.
I'll move recommendation number 2.
All right. Seconder? All in favor? So moved. I think that completes this agenda, so motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And seconded, all in favor? Comments